Some of you were here last week. I got to do a meet an interesting person thing, just stand up here for 2 minutes, kind of explain where I'm at right now. But just to reiterate, if you weren't here, last week I celebrated 4 years of sobriety, which is like a huge thing for me. Thank you, thank you. And I just say that to say all 4 years of that, and plus a little bit, were spent here at New Abbey, figuring that out, walking through this thing with all of you. And this has been a space that's allowed me to really I think there's a distinct. I was a pastor before, and I knew Corey. He was my coach, and there was this distinct moment in my recovery where I knew I needed to get sober. I knew I needed to get well. I really burned out in a super dramatic and sort of like flashy LA way, and I knew. Checking into rehab for the first time, kind of going through and then beginning to talk about what my life was going to look like after I got out of that space. And that's always the scariest thing because I had no job lined up, I had no anything. The one thing I knew was really clear was I remember saying to myself, if I don't find a church, I'll probably never go back to church. Like that will probably never be a part of my rhythm. And that's not like the biggest deal in the world. There are plenty of awesome people who have like incredible spiritual journeys, faith, higher power, all that, who don't go to church at all. But like I was the son of a pastor. This has been a space in my life that I've always had and grown in and stretched in and all that good stuff. And I realized like even if no one in the church is also in recovery, like if I don't have that space, I'm letting go of a part of my identity. And so being in this space has really helped me hold on to that piece, but not just hold on to that piece. I feel like it's really helped me grow in that piece. And I don't think I'm alone here. Like just my story is like recovery, but everyone in here for the most part has a kind of story that goes, I was in a certain space and that was fine for a while. And then it got disrupted and it was not fine for a while. And then I regrew and I found something different. And I really think that's kind of the journey of like recovery. Recovery is just a really loud version of that, but like there's this version of recovery which is covering. That's the first piece of it, which is like I'm covered in this nice little blanket, just having a couple drinks tonight, bumping cocaine, whatever it is for you. And I'm doing whatever I'm doing, and it's feeling good, and it's fine. And then there's an uncovering. And what's really interesting is the word apocalypse. First thing out my get, we're going to talk about the apocalypse. The word apocalypse means uncovering. That's all that means. It means something is uncovered. And so in the journey of recovery, it's that first step where I go, oh my gosh, there's a serious issue here, right? I don't know how to fix this. I'm powerless to do that on my own. I don't know what to do. And there's an uncovering of that nice, cozy blanket. And then there's a period of discovery, which is another covery, this is so evangelical, in which you find what I need. What do I need to recover myself with? And that final stage is recovery, and that lasts your entire life. Of what do I want to take with me? What do I want to bind and loose? What do I want to let go of? And what do I want to take with me? And I think in healthy spirituality, that's the journey over and over and over again. As I get to this place, I feel like I'm covered. I feel like I'm good. And then look, ooh, there's that next disruption. And then there's that next recovery of what I want to take with me and what I need to leave behind now. There's no more evident version of this than the very first couple chapters of the Bible. And so we're going to go through the story of Adam and Eve. This is oftentimes called the fall, but we're going to kind of tell the story in a different way today. So this is Genesis 3, and poor Mike is back there all alone. You got it? Awesome. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. I just want to hold on that slide for a second there. The word for that, like in Hebrew, the word for walking in the cool of the evening, like that's actually the word saunter. I learned this. Do you know that the French are the only people who have a word called fleur, which is the art of the stroll? It's just a calm walk, like he's just walking through the garden, unhurried, not angry, none of it, right? There's a very calm and collected, cool version of God here. And the other thing I want to point out is that this is the first time that fear enters the story of human history. That we always talk about this as like sin and what they've done wrong and all that good stuff. Maybe that's all true. I don't know. It's a different sermon for a different day. The real thing that I want to focus on today is that this is the first instance we have of us being afraid. Of, oh man, I don't know what to do. I've done something wrong. I don't know how to recover from that. And so the response is to hide, right? Let's go on to that next slide. But then the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" And he answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that?" So I just want to point out, this is the first instance of fear. When we're in fear, we're in a space in our brain called fight or flight, right? A lot of you probably know that because a lot of you have done a lot of good work in that space. Fight or flight literally means I'm going to fight this person, I'm going to fight. And there's a third one, and it's fawn, and it's freeze, and it's all that good stuff. But for today, we're just going to talk about fight or flight, right? That space in our brain is the amygdala, which is the lizard brain. It's one of the first places in our brain that evolved. And when we are in that state, we do not have connection to the prefrontal cortex in the same way, which is the only thing that gives us logic, right? We actually studied that. I work in a treatment center. We hooked a guy up who's this genius PhD student kid, and we put him in states of fear, and he took a certain IQ test, and then we put him in states of like non-fear. He just took it as he was. His IQ dropped 40 points in fear. 40 points. That's not like a national study. There's not a huge amount of data, but I think if our IQ is dropping at all when we're in a state of fear, like that's something to pay attention to, that we're outside of logic, that we're outside of playing with a full deck. And so when God is sauntering through the garden and he finds Adam and Eve in this state of fight or flight, of actual fear, I'm going to pay really close attention to the two first questions that are ever uttered by God. The whole rest of the story up until this point, it's let there be light, let there be trees, let us separate the light from day. It's all fact. It's all statement. When fear enters the narrative, there's now questions. That God is kind enough to offer a question first and foremost. And those two first questions, and I think this is what God speaks into our fear, and these are really important for us to carry with us, are where are you and who told you that? Where are you and who told you that? That's God's response to fear. Where are you? Who told you that? And in the biblical tradition, when they were naked, that's a symbol. Everything in here is a beautiful poem, right? But when they are naked in there, that's a symbol for shame. It's a symbol for guilt. Back in the day, if you saw someone who was naked, which I mean, I don't know if that was a daily occurrence, but if you saw someone who was naked or nude, the shame was actually on you. It wasn't on the person. And so when you saw that, you were shamed, and you had to go to the temple, and you had to get ritually cleansed, and that could cost money, and that could cost time, that could cost all of these things. And I think it's really interesting. We won't go through the whole book of Genesis here, but in a couple of verses, God's response is, yes, okay, all these things are going to happen now that you ate that fruit. But then his response is he pulls them out of the garden, this transition, this moment where they get to transform a little bit. He covers them. He says, here's clothes, right? I don't want you to live this out in shame. I don't want you to think like this, right? I don't want you to have to hide, which is the first thing that Adam's instinct is like, okay, let's hide. And I think that's the most addicty, alcoholic-y thing in the whole world, because the response there is, I think we could just get away with this for the rest of our lives. Like, as soon as we hear him out, we will hide, and then that's the pattern, and we'll just go along our business. I bet we can get away with that totally, right? I remember a therapist asking me, they were like, what was your plan with drinking? As a pastor, it's a really difficult thing to hold that for a long time. And I was like, I honestly, this was a super honest moment. It was a breakthrough moment for me. I was like, I thought I could hide that the rest of my life. I thought I could hide the rest of my life. And that's the unfortunate part of sin and shame and guilt. It's not that what we've done is so bad or that we need to feel guilty or anything like that. It's that it keeps us hidden. So it keeps me behind something and unwilling to participate with something greater than myself, because I think I'm somehow discounted from that or away. I work in recovery now. My whole life is recovery. I'm studying my KDAC right now, so like my whole head is filled with knowledge and facts about addiction and all that good stuff. I have to read about it constantly. And in the time that I've journeyed thus far, which is not super long, just 4 years, high school experience, something like that, what I've really come to find is I sit with people and I talk with people and they share their stories, is that addiction really boils down to two things, and it's escape and it's control. And we can see that not just in addiction, because we all have our addiction. And honestly, our addictions are not as loud as maybe a substance or something, usually come down to what I want to control and what I want to escape from, and how I do that, right? If I can't control it, I want to escape from it. If I can't escape it, I want to try and control it. If I can't do either of those things, I'm usually in an unhealthy state, going to reach for something unhealthy to solve that, no matter what. Like whether that's food, sex, alcohol, you name it, relationships, we have some kind of tie or attachment or addiction. The Latin root for addiction means in debt to. It's an attachment. And the French root for attachment is to nail to a wall. Something that I've actually nailed myself to. That's that important. That to become unattached from that, I would have to rip myself from that, right? If we're going to talk about control, I need to share a story of one of my favorite people that I met in rehab. And I reached out to them to ask if I could tell this story. So this is completely cool, and I'll tell you that that's the follow-up story to this. It was amazing just to reach out to them. This person's name, we're going to call this person Tussin. Tussin, short for Robitussin, was self-named this. So Tussin, this is the moniker that she went by. When she found out I was a pastor, she called me Rev, and so when we were talking, it was like Rev and Tussin. She arrived famously. I went to this rehab called Betty Ford, which used to be like the nicest rehab you could go to. When you walk into that rehab, they have pictures like some diner with celebrities would have on the wall of like Lindsay Lohan, Brad Pitt. Like, it's the weirdest thing in the world. Like, here are our esteemed alumni. And you walk in, you're like, okay, I guess I'm in good company. And then you hear stories all over the place. Like when you checked into Daisy Lane, which was like their sober living, they'd be like, Lindsay Lohan scaled that wall over there. Tussin was easily the greatest thing that this rehab had ever seen. This was not her first go at recovery. She was legendary there already. I was there for about a week. It was a shaky week. And Betty Ford especially, it's not the nicest anymore. It's bought by Hazelton, which is like an insurance-run company. So now it has like this incredible campus, but it's like you're living in a hospital. Which isn't bad, by the way. But when I got there for the first week, you kind of get acclimated, and they have some really specific rules. One is no fraternization. So they separate the men and the women. You can't talk to a person of the opposite end of the spectrum. If you do, you can risk the chance of getting kicked out of the rehab. And so when Rev and Tussin would talk, it was not a great situation. Tussin arrived, and she broke all of these norms. Oh, and then the structure of the day was like group therapy, and then you would eat some meals, and then you would maybe go to this gym, and then you could walk around the lake because they had like a lake on this property. And then at the end, there was a lecture, and then you would leave the lecture, and you'd go into small groups, and you process. The minute I got there, I was like, this is a church camp. This is a church camp. They separate the guys and the girls. We have a lecture, we process, we play ping pong afterwards, maybe we watch a DVD. This is what it was, right? So I started to get a little bit more comfortable. I was like, I can do a church camp. I've done church camps before. And the people aren't as mean at this rehab as they were at most of those church camps. So Tussin arrives, and Tussin arrives in a Bentley. She's driven by someone else. It has the type of doors that open up both ways. And she gets out, and she's in a full mink, I don't know what the animal was, but it was an animal fur, and it was big. Tussin is like maybe in her mid-60s. She's big, she's animated, she looks like Cruella de Vil. She's walking out, and literally it was such a scene that I looked outside and I was like, who is coming in here? And then somebody behind me goes, that's Tussin. I mean, it was that kind of like deal. Tussin gets in, I get put into group therapy with Tussin. This is the only time you can fraternize and like talk with members of the opposite sex. And we're in a group therapy session. And she is a character, man. She's joking constantly. She's got this raspy kind of smoker's voice. Very famously, once in a group therapy session with her, she lit up a cigarette inside. And then the guy, the leader, was like, you can't smoke in here. And then she put it out. And I'm not kidding. She put it out in an ashtray. She had an ashtray just like down there, and she puts it out. So Tussin was this total character. And one day I get to that group therapy session, and Tussin isn't there. And I'm like, oh no, like what happened to Tussin? And the group leader says, well, Tussin's not with us right now. She's okay. We know she's okay, but she's going to spend some time away. And we're like, okay. And I found out that Tussin, late in the night, had broken out. And you literally had to jailbreak. Like, you had to break out. You had to get through, like, 3 different stages of security to get out. And she gets out. She hails an Uber in the middle of Palm Springs. And she goes out onto the town. And very famously, this was covered in many, many a group session afterwards, she bought up all the Robitussin in Palm Springs and Rancho Mirage. All of it. right? And then when they found it in her room, they found stockpiles of Robitussin, and when asked, why did you do this, her response was, I just wanted to know I had all of it, right? Talk about control. I just want to know I had all of it. And that's a wild story, but the truth is, like, I have stories like that. A lot of people have stories like that, just on a much different scale. When I reached out to Tussin to ask if I could share some of these stories, and I was like, I know this is a crazy ask, is this okay? Her response was beautiful. She's like, Josh, I hope you're doing so well. It's so good to see, like, we follow each other on Instagram. She's like, it's so good to see you have a daughter and you're in the world. And Tussin's doing really, really well. She's got grandkids now. She's like with them. She's like posting them. She's in recovery. It's beautiful. She's like, I hope you're doing really well. I don't remember any of the stories that you just threw out to me, but have fun with them. I was like, check. That's classic Tussin. That's that idea of control and escape. I need to have it all, so I'm going to escape to go grab it all, to hoard all those resources for myself, because if I can have all these resources, then I'm okay. I'm okay for a little sliver of time. And I think that's true of all of us. Have you ever been on vacation? This is a classic. This may be more than a millennial deal or an alcoholic deal, but have you ever been on like a vacation and about like 2 days into the vacation, you're like, I could live here? You ever said that to yourself? Like, yeah, I could see myself here, right? I think that is the classic addiction sort of instinct to go, I can't just experience this thing. I need to have it. Like if I'm sitting around with friends near a fire pit and we're having a great time, the only thing that's going through my mind as an alcoholic is, I need to buy a fire pit, right? Like there's missing the moment to come back into, I need to have this thing so that I can feel happy or I can feel okay, right? If we go back to the story of Adam and Eve, they're walking through this garden and everything in it is theirs. And yet there's this one moment where they go, you know what though? That over there, like if we had that, that would be pretty sweet, right? We could own that like God owns that, you know? I am classic for saying that phrase, I could live here. If my wife was here, she just took our 2-year-old daughter out, but I say that almost everywhere. We live in Woodland Hills. We've lived there for about 2 years now. And the reason we moved there is both because my father-in-law owns a duplex there, which is fantastic. And then the other reason is we can go through Topanga because we both work on the west side. So you can drive through Topanga. It's the best commute in the world. You drive through a mountain range and then you drive next to the ocean and then you go to work. It's a pretty sweet deal. When the Palisade fires hit, that whole community was hit really, really hard. And the ability to drive through the canyon, and this is such champagne problems that it's not that big of a deal at all, but the ability to drive through the canyon and then make that commute disappeared overnight. And that's happened several times before. Topanga is like kind of notorious for they'll just shut it down. Like if there's a whiff of a fire, they're like, shut it down, and you cannot get through there. And that's great. Like they did great in that fire too. But we've been sitting in the car now for like 2 hours in the morning and then 2 hours in the afternoon. So 4 hours total in the car to commute to work. And my wife's school partially burned, and so they had to move it over to the Water Gardens in Santa Monica. So it moved from the Palisades to Santa Monica. And so we're driving the same commute, and it's just taking a lot of time, right? And so there's been this constant sort of like narrative of, do we need to move? Is it worth moving? And honestly, all of my bad times were in Santa Monica. We lived there. I was a pastor of a church there for 9.5 years, almost a decade. And every street corner has a story in my mind. Every alley, every liquor store, every bar, you name it, there's something bad attached to it. And that's just me. My poor wife, there's so many more instances of being scarred in that space that with the west side to us is just dead for many reasons. We don't want to go back to there. But this really kind of pushed us to the edge, and we were like, I don't know, should we like go over there? And then that got our mind thinking like, well, if we're driving 2 hours anyway, what else is 2 hours away that maybe we could just do that commute? Like, like let's push it out there. And so we're in everywhere we go. I'm like, could this be it? Could this be the place? And I'm putting my happiness over there. I'm going like, I could see my life. We could do this. And what it's really manifested into is Zillow. Anybody else struggle with Zillow? Literally every night, I will open up Zillow like a drug addict, and I will go through and I will get the hits of like, oh yeah, there's a 2-bedroom apartment, Mar Vista, ugly. But if I look in Ventura, what in the world can you get for that same price outside the Los Angeles city limits? And it's this constant comparison game. And I'll look all the time, and I get emails. It knows it so well that on Friday I got an email from Zillow that said, here's your weekend plans. And it was like all of like the open houses that were going to happen on the west side. And I was like, it knows me far too well. I've since tried to delete the app. It doesn't matter. They get me on the email, and inevitably I'm in there, right? I need to work a first step on Zillow. But the point is, everywhere we go now, I'm saying that line, I could live here, right? And we were in Ventura, and then we drove up to Ojai last weekend, because if you go the other direction from where we live, you can drive on the freeway and there's no traffic, and that to me is like healing. So we we drive down to Ventura, and we hang out for a little bit, and then we go up to Ojai, and we hang out for a little bit. And when we get to Ojai, we see these friends. We're like turning the corner, and I initially go, oh my God. And it's two of these people, one of which sat on the board of my old church. And I blew it at that church. There were so many instances I wish I could do over. And so whenever I see someone from that community, my heart just breaks. And I go, oh man, I don't know how they feel about me, but I'll do anything I can to try and reform that or redeem that. And instead of like a sort of like offsetting response, we get this enormous, Josh, Chelsea. Turns out they had recognized our dog before they recognized us, which is a very Santa Monica thing to do. And they pull us over to their table, and they're eating at this table in this restaurant in Ojai, and we sit down, and they give us this big, huge hug. And Nick, the name of the husband, gives me a huge hug, and he said, I've missed you so much. We moved here right after all that stuff went down, after the pandemic hit, to get out of LA, and we've been searching for a church, and we can't find anything. And we just miss you guys so much. We're sitting at that table, and instantly, that's all I need from my mind to go, should we start a church in Ventura? Lord, are you calling me to Ojai? And we sit down, and we break bread, which, again, another sign in my mind. I'm like, this is like communion, right? Like, everything is coming together. I'm basically pulling out Zillow on my phone. And then, and I kid you not, I wish this is an absolute true fact, and this is like a progressive Christian white dove. Rob Bell crosses the street, like in front of me. I guess he lives up there. I don't know. But he was literally, I was like, that's Rob Bell. And everything in me was like, this is literally, God is screaming at me, you need to move to Ojai. We leave that situation, I sober up. And we think about it, and we're like, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely insane. But my addict self, the next day, I was like, let's go to dinner over in Ventura and clock it. Like we can totally figure out how long it'll take to drive there, like on a Sunday, that we can do some addition, some subtraction, and figure it out, add a little time for traffic. We'll see where we're at. And we go to dinner, and the dinner is amazing. And the sun is like setting, and there's this restaurant that's like kind of off the main little street in Ventura that's like behind in this alley. And our dog is with us, and he's barking, and so I'm like, I'm just gonna go take him out and walk him. And I walk up this hill, and I see like the sun setting over palm trees, and I'm like, oh man, this is it. God is calling me to be here. And then I had this really profound moment, and I don't have a lot of these. I had this really profound moment that felt like a whisper or like something like that, like a feeling, like a warm feeling. And it wasn't, I'm calling you here. It was like, no, you don't remember what it feels like to be happy. That this is happiness. That you're standing here and the sun is going down, you're with your dog, and you're with your daughter, and you're with your wife, and you have the ability to go out to a meal in Ventura, California. And your life is coming back together. And I just felt like I don't need to build my home somewhere else. I need to build my home in that kind of joy and happiness. And no matter where I am, I will have that joy and that happiness. That's the thing that sustains us. I think outside of fear and trying to panic and figure it out is contentment. That's the opposite of that. I like to call contentment settled joy. It's joy that's not going anywhere. Happiness is fleeting. It's a really micro feeling. It comes and it goes. But settled joy, contentment, that's something we can meditate in. That's something we can foster. That's something I can pray for. That's something I can get used to. And so now wherever I am, I no longer say I could live here, and this is super cheesy, but it's the truth. I grab my heart and I go, I could live here, right? Because that's what's been shown to me. With that, I want you to get back in your groups, and I want you to go and answer this question. What do you want to let go? Go for it.